One of the most important events in history is not very well known to humankind. This event that has paved Earth as we know it today had many positives and negatives. This happened by sending oxygen from oxygen-emitting organisms on land and underwater into the atmosphere.
Oxygenation event, or the GOE. This event paved a new way to life, but also caused the first mass extinction. Imagine, before the oxygen crisis, Earth was a Venus-like planet.
The water was tinted green because of the cyanobacteria, which was located just below the surface of water. It collected sunlight from its green-blue pigments, which collected the sunlight that they needed to use the method of photosynthesis. There was mainly cyanobacteria in the oceans, but there was evidence that cyanobacteria was also on land.
So Stephen, how would you explain cyanobacteria?
So in the most basic terms, it paved a new way to new and complex life.
How so?
It sent oxygen into the atmosphere, and that made it so living organisms to be something that improved their way of living and expanded their capabilities.
Why are cyanobacteria blue and green?
So basically, cyanobacteria is blue and green because of the photosynthesis system that surrounds the cyanobacteria.
What do you think is most interesting about cyanobacteria?
I think the most interesting thing about it is it paved a new way for all life, but it also caused the first mass extinction.
Well, thank you for your time, Dr. Stephen Lee.
It is a pleasure to share my knowledge with everyone and give a chance for everyone to learn about cyanobacteria. The land was bombarded by UV radiation. Barely any life survived on Earth, except for single-cellular organisms. For example, cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. Most of the organisms survived in the ocean. Unlike today, the atmosphere was a combination of nitrogen and carbon dioxide.
Somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 billion years ago, one of the many species of cyanobacteria hanging around the surface of the ocean evolved to develop photosynthesis. It was the first organism to develop photosynthesis and the first organism on Earth to make the waste product oxygen.
This gave the cyanobacteria a huge advantage over other organisms because they developed a way to get endless energy out of raw resources. The photosynthesis collected sunlight from the sun and converted it into oxygen as a waste product. After a couple of years, the atmosphere became oxygen-rich and most of the organisms died since oxygen is toxic to them.
The planet eventually switched to an ice age since the oxygen blocked out most of the sun rays. That was the beginning of the first major ice age. The first ice age lasted about 300 million years. It was called the Huronian glaciation. The Earth was essentially a giant snowball or an ice ball. Some parts of the snow and ice was 1 mile deep. Even the cyanobacteria barely survived the ice age.
The aerobic organisms sucked up some of the excess oxygen. Eventually, they sucked up most of the oxygen and the ice age eventually ended. Over the course of 4.5 billion years, the Earth's atmosphere went from almost no oxygen to 32% oxygen and back to 21% oxygen that we have today.
What is an aerobic organism?
It is a type of organism that can live and grow in an oxygen-rich environment.
What did they do back then?
They had to breathe oxygen, so they sucked up the oxygen and eventually ended the ice age.
Are there different types of aerobic organisms?
There are 4 main types of organisms: obligate anaerobes, aerobes, facultative anaerobes, microaerophils, and aerotolerant anaerobes.
Is there anything else you would like to mention before the end of the interview?
Personally, the most interesting thing about these organisms is that they can be either unicellular or multicellular.
Thank you for your time. Wait, I never caught your name.
David.
Thank you, David. Oxygen gave living organisms the ability to diversify into more complex life forms. Cyanobacteria had a part to play in the evolution of complex life forms. A couple of 100 million years ago, some other microbe, presumably larger than those cyanobacteria, swallowed it whole in a course of endosymbiosis. In that process, that microbe acquired its own photosynthesis system.
And such bacteria became the ancestor of plant cells, and cyanobacteria became the part of the cell called chloroplast, the part that produces photosynthesis today. To this day, there are still cyanobacteria in almost every environment, including oceans, fresh water, soil, Antarctic rocks, and even sloth fur.
Without cyanobacteria, there probably wouldn't be any complex life on Earth. The lesson to be learned is to never underestimate the importance of any living organism, whether it be ants, monkeys, or even blue whales.